I'm Kim Hamblin.
I'm Dan Rinke.
And
go ahead, tell them about our
shit. How did we get started? We started in 2011 with wine, and then we started with cider in 2013. And partly we started with cider because we bought property behind us, and it was just a huge piece of land. So we're trying to figure out what to do on it. So planting apples was where we landed. But Dan, you want to take over?
Well, do you guys have a background in wine? Because I mean, I know that the way that I've seen you guys talk about art and science is that Dan is the science and Kim is the art. So could you kind of tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I just, when we first started thinking about a name, I was just looking at it, our degrees, and Kim's degree is in art. She went to university for art, and I went to university for science. Doesn't matter, close enough. And so that's how that came about. My degree is in plant science, specifically viticulture. And I've been in the wine industry since probably about 1997.
So I remember you telling me a really interesting story about Chapoutier and being in, was it in Minnesota?
Oh, no, that was in Wisconsin. So I represented it back in the early 2000s. This is actually 2001. I was selling Chapoutier wines, and I was at a winemaker dinner with him, and or at his winemaker dinner, I had a few customers with me, and at the end of the meal, I went, this is Wisconsin 2001, so you could still smoke in a bar. So I went to the bar and had a cigarette after my meal, and the only other person doing the same thing was Chapoutier, because he's French. And we just ended up sitting down and talking for about 45 minutes about biodynamics and winemaking. And I don't know, at the time I was a vegetarian. We were talking about vegetarianism. It was just an all-encompassed conversation after, probably too many cigarettes and too many glasses of wine. And I was really excited to tell him, after we've been talking about biodynamics for a while. My friend that was was a Waldorf school teacher, and how excited I was about biodynamics. And then I told him, oh yeah, I'm going to go to school to learn how to make wine. And he's like, well, why would you do that? You should go to school to learn how to grow grapes, because that's the more important part. And the winemaking, well, that just happens. And so the next Monday, I got on the phone and called the university and switched my major from enology to viticulture.
So you went
not that easily influenced now.
Right? So that means that you basically went to school to learn how to grow grapes with the intention to make wine. Eventually.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
winemaker.
When I went to Fresno State, I had already been in the university system for, I've been in the university system and then went to a community college and got a degree in business management, because I thought I wanted to manage restaurants. And then I had the opportunity of opening a restaurant, and realized that that's a hell of a lot of hours and late night hours and not the greatest schedules. So I thought it would be cool to work in a wine shop. So then I worked in a wine shop for a couple of years, and again, thought that, the grass looked greener on the other side. So I went to become a distributor and worked for two different wine distributors. And then I decided to go into production. I realized
so you've kind of touched all the areas of wine, from distribution to on-premise to production.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And then by the time I got to the university, I mean, I started in restaurants really early, young. I was bartending when I was 18 years old, which is totally legal in Wisconsin. They're a little bit more liberal on their liquor laws. Um, and so I was bartending early on. I ended up I was working for a distributor when I was 22 years old. Was when I started, and I was in the university going to school. I was 27 ish. I remember being 10 years older than some of the kids in my classes.
Is it true you went? Is it correct that you went to you were at Fresno State at the same time as Chad Stock?
Yeah. Chad is we graduated roughly at the same time. I graduated a year earlier than him. But yeah, we were there roughly at the same time. I was also there at the same time as Ryan Glab, who's part of Rhyme down in California. There's so many other people. Giannato Wines, both Stephanie Teresi and Brian Teresi was there at the same time as me. And there's a bunch of Mike Roth from Lo-Fi Wines.
And so was it kind of, I mean, was there like an awareness when you were in school about like kind of what we would call minimal intervention wines or even organic biodynamic farming? Was that already a thing at that point, or?
I think biodynamic farming was. I mean, when I came to Fresno, I actually had a huge culture shock because I came from selling Chapoutier wines and Nicolas Jolet wines, Josmeyer wines. We sold Powers wines from Washington State. So we had these organic producers for sure. And I came to Fresno State for viticulture and was expecting to be taught organic farming, and that's not what they were teaching at all. So while I was there, a group of students and I started an organic farming club, basically, and because we wanted to supplement our education for what we weren't getting in the university. So we would invite guest speakers once a month and try to learn about organic farming at the same time as all the conventional university-driven farming.
And so from there, after you graduated, did you work more, like, did you kind of move, how did you get from California to Oregon?
I was hired by a company called Domaine Alfred. They're in the Edna Valley of California, so just outside of San Luis Obispo. I was hired as their assistant winemaker, and part of the job of the assistant winemaker was to oversee the vineyard management company that took care of the vineyards. And I knew nothing about winemaking, so I was hired as an assistant winemaker and had to learn all the winemaking on the fly. Like, I didn't even know how to use a triclover clamp. Like, I was taught everything start to finish. So that was that was where I learned cellar practices, I would say. And then my mentor winemaker, Mike Seiner, left about a year into my time there. And he was the guy that I came to work with and who I wanted to learn from. And the new winemaker, we didn't exactly see eye to eye on a lot of things, so it was time for me to move on. And I accepted a job as the viticulturist for Reese Vineyards, which is in Santa Cruz Mountains, just south of San Francisco. And I worked for Reese as a viticulturalist. And while working as a viticulturalist there, I was still like working in the winery as like a harvest intern, basically. So I'd wake up super early in the morning, drive up to Sonoma from the Bay Area, pick up the grapes and bring them back to the winery, and then be there all night long processing them until 1, 2 in the morning, and then wake up at 4 in the morning and go and get more grapes from Sonoma and then drive them back down to the Bay Area. And it was really exhausting, but I really appreciated learning their how they would manage their fruit as they came in, and how they would respect terroir, because they were definitely a very terroir driven winery. And they're on the minimal addition side. So to get back to talking about natural wine and the evolution of natural wine into what it used to be, it used to just be minimal intervention, minimal additions, things like that. Because if you think about it, in the late 90s, all those wines were starting with a 97 harvest, where it was super hot, uber warm in California. They learned that they can make these massive wines with getting them overripe and throwing a bunch of enzymes at them, and a lot of new oak and wood chips, and just throwing everything at them winemaking wise. And I would say I was on the other side of the pendulum from that, looking at that and going, well, I'm not doing this in my farming. I'm not putting a lot of chemistries in my farming, and I'm trying to do real natural farming. Why would I do this in the winery and the winemaking? And so I definitely leaned more towards the minimal intervention. Not saying that Reese is a natural winery by any means, but their additions existed of two things. It was sulfur and acid. So for me, it was just once you remove the acid additions, that's the type of winemaking I wanted to do. And then just as things evolved, I got even away from sulfur additions, and I prefer not to use sulfur additions if I don't have to, but I'm also not to the point where if it needs it, I'm going to use it.
So let's say we move forward to like 2011, you guys start Art and Science as a label. And how did you start it together as a couple? And like, how do you divide the labor? Like, who does what? How do you figure out who does what?
Well, originally in 2011, we started with a very little bit of Syrah. So we made one barrel of Syrah. And that was made at Johann Vineyards, where I was the winemaker at the time. And so I was doing most of the work, if not all the work on the wine. Went to bottle, and as soon as it got to bottle, then it was Kim's turn. She had to make the label, make the art for the label, make the label, we used to wax all our bottles back then, so do all the waxing and the art stuff. She was the director of
artistic
director.
I prefer to have a title.
And so has that kind of division of labor kind of evolved as you got a farm and branched out into?
Yes.
She does a lot more work now, a lot more than I do.
Well, mostly just the fruit, the apples and pears processing.
Just to give people some background, so you guys make you guys now make wine, cider, and pet nats, right?
Perry and co-ferment.
Perry and co-ferment. So, I think one thing that, is really interesting is that for the most part, I feel like ciders in Washington State have been really challenging. A lot of our buyers will talk about how difficult it is for them to sell kind of cider as a category here. And I was thinking that it might be helpful for people to get a background. If you could give us like a little bit of an overview of maybe what makes this kind of ciders that you guys make different from some of the more commercially available ciders, just kind of a factual difference. Because I think that a lot of times, consumers will look at the term cider and they just put it in one category. And because of that, it can be really confusing for people, because I feel like the price range, that per ounce price of cider can range so significantly that I think it's hard for people to understand why you might have this price differential.
Well, first of all, I don't understand why people would have that issue if they're used to wine. I mean, if you start with Gallo,
right?
Because most of the stuff that's coming in a 6-pack is the Gallo of cider,
right?
You know?
Okay, that's a good way to think about it.
I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, most of Gallo's wine that's made is made from Thompson seedless, which is it's a seedless grape that you eat as a fruit. And most of the most of the cider that's being made in the country, really, it's being made from fruit that's meant to be eaten as a fruit. It's not meant to be made into a beverage. So
Also-
once you think about where the starting materials come from, I mean that's the beginning of the whole set.
Well, and hand-picked, foraged, organic or biodynamic fruit versus machine-picked, high-input commercial fruit for the dessert industry that ends up going to, a big processing facility in Hood River where they all get mixed up and thrown in a tanker truck together. So it's just like cheap, watery fruit. So a lot of the companies in the Pacific Northwest in general buy that cheap fruit, and I mean, I don't blame them. It's really cheap. It's like I that's how they can keep their price point so low. Is what is it? You just looked at it the other day. It was like
$1.50 a gallon
if you buy a certain amount. So it was $1.50 a gallon, or up to like $3.05 a gallon or something. But if you buy a tanker full of pear juice,
5,500 gallon tanker.
So you can basically just buy the juice. You don't even have to touch the fruit.
Right? No, most of them don't. Like,
yeah,
I feel like some of the companies are starting to change a little bit now as there's better fruit coming on. I mean, but the problem is they're addicted to the profit margin of that low fruit. So they try to make a better quality product, and it's really hard to make that price. And you've been selling a keg for $80 or something, and your volume is so low on it, and it's like, well, you make a lot of money on that, So I think it's really hard when they start actually having to do the labor of the processing, buying quality fruit. And then that's not even talking about, that's still commercially farmed and conventionally farmed. It's not talking about organic or biodynamic at that point. So we start with the best possible fruit.
See, I think I came from it being exposed first to what you guys are doing in kind of old world ciders. And so I just assumed all cider was, fruit that was obtained by the cider maker. They were pressing it. It was naturally carbonated through, the in bottle conditioned, and then I learned, oh wow, there's this whole other way to produce cider, which is forced carbonated and juice purchased. And it sounds to me like it's not really a bad or good thing, but it really is just that they're almost totally different products, and but they're being put under the same label, so we just equate them as the same thing. And so for me, it's just been really interesting because I noticed that some of our producers in Europe, they've kind of moved towards calling their ciders fruit pet nats, because they're trying to really bring people back to the idea that cider is actually a form of wine made with non-grape fruit, and so it's more like pet nats made with not using grapes, kind of. So it's been really interesting to give people that context. So do you think you could just take us through your process? Like when we talk about something like humble cider or humble perry, like what's the basic workflow of you making this product?
Well, a lot of the humble cider, for instance, is our kind of our lowest grade cider. So that would be like a lot of that fruit comes from old abandoned sort of orchards. So a lot of it is dessert fruit, but it hasn't been farmed for like there's an orchard near us that we pick, and a lot of the humble base is that. So it's, unfarmed, unmanaged, and often scabby and kind of hard fruit, and we just keep it all, we collect it throughout the season and cold store it, and then we start processing it all at the same time, basically, or if we run out of space and start getting it out. So we mill it. So we have like just a kind of a lowbrow mill.
Can I point out one thing that she said in between there is we'll pick it and then we'll store it. And that storing time for traditional ciders is called sweating.
Mhm.
And what that does is it allows the starches in the apple to break down a little bit. It makes the apple more mealy, so it's not really pleasant to eat that way. But what it's doing is it's breaking down the sugars, making the sugars more available. It's making a lot of the phenolics that are in the apple and flavonoids more available to the solution once it's eventually pressed.
Yeah.
And it's also dehydrating the fruit
Yeah,
a little bit,
concentrates it a
so it's
little.
concentrating the sugars and the acids and the flavors.
So it sounds like you know, in terms of like time, you know, you want to pick the fruit or purchase the fruit from an orchard, leave it to sweat out to concentrate the flavor, kind of almost cure a little bit, like get more concentrated flavor so that when you mill it, it's going to be more concentrated and the flavor has been more developed. So that's already an investment of time right there between
Yeah.
the apples being ready to pick. So could you give us a general overview of, I mean, what is the difference between making a cider from a dessert apple and like maybe a cider apple?
Well, there's not much of a difference as far as process goes.
No, I meant like
But just
results.
the
Yeah.
flavors are totally different. I mean, it's the same thing as thinking of grapes too. Like, you know, if you think of any of your store-bought grapes, um, they're way larger. The grapes themselves, the clusters, the grapes themselves are way larger than the wine varieties. So and most of the cider apples are the same way. They're a little bit smaller in stature, which means you're getting a little bit more skin to juice ratio. A lot of the flavonoids, both in wines and in apples, come from the skins. But there's also a lot of the cider apples have different categories. There's bitter sweets, which are high in sugar, but tend to be a little bit more tannic. So the cider industry, this comes from the British cider side. The British say equate bitter with tannin. So there's bitter sweets. There's bitter sharps, which would be tannic and acidic, but lower in sugar. And then there's sharps and there's sweets. Even if it's sweet, it still could be tannic and a bitterness. There's another aspect of, not, I don't want to say bitterness, but I guess, I mean, bitterness is another way of saying it, but there's like a different flavor profile. It's more like, think of like a Campari kind of flavor or an orange pith kind of flavor component. They tend to have more dimension. The resulting ciders also tend to have more body and weight.
Well, and if you think about it, a dessert apple is normally sweet because that's what we're used to. That's what people have been pushing for. So it's a sweet fruit, and all that sugar. If there's no other dimension to it, that sugar just gets fermented, right? So if it's not, doesn't have a little acid or a little bit of tannic, it's just that, you know, it just kind of falls flat. Which is, I mean, it's a good base if you're going to add habaneros or something, you know. But if you want it as like its own product, it's not necessarily the best base. I mean, we do things like, you know, when we first started, we didn't have a lot of access to cider fruit, and so and you know, some of our forage stuff still does this, where we'll macerate it we'll mill it and then macerate it. So we'll macerate it for overnight and let it sit on those skins, so it develops a little bit more dimension to it.
Well, and there's other things that happen too. Like there's enzymatic reactions. Like think of taking an apple and biting into it and it turns brown. That browning action is an enzymatic reaction, and that also helps release more flavors and more texture and weight. So milling something and macerating it overnight, you're also oxygenating it too, and getting some oxygen in there and some enzymes happening, and starts breaking down a bunch of components of the apple itself, allowing it to release more as you press it then.
I mean, you can do it for. I mean, shoot, we left stuff sit for a week and a half or something while we were away on a trip just to see, like, oh, well, let's see what it does. We don't have time to press it, and it was interesting because we had one barrel of that and one barrel of the exact same fruit, but freshly milled and pressed, and it was interesting to see the differences. I mean, you could definitely tell. So it was kind of cool just to.
So you guys, so it sounds like, I know that you work with Mount Hood Organic Farms to get some of their fruit. You also forage, which involves making relationships with, I guess, the people who own the land to get permission to go and forage. And I remember, Kim, you were saying to me that in some ways, if you counted labor, it actually costs more to forage the fruit in terms of time than if you just went and purchased fruit.
I think that's probably true. It depends on the product. I mean, some of them, sometimes you have like a whole orchard that you pick and I mean, like the one we do for the Humble, like, if I don't show up, they kind of get mad. Like, where are you? You're supposed to be here picking this fruit that's hitting the ground. But like, then there's other things like, the little teeny itty bitty crab apples that we forage for the little apples. And that's where you,
or the red flesh.
Yeah, or the freaking red flesh. The red flesh one is like,
we just brought them in, and I think we got the last of the quantities available.
You did. You got the last of it,
right? So what?
Well, that one I joke on the back label that was manifested because I was like hell bent on stalking red flesh. I wanted a red flesh foraged cider, even if it was like a carboy. I was trying to find like enough, not that we have any carboys, but we're kind of limited to barrels. But so I was looking for red flesh, and it's really hard to find. So we started, I found a lot of plums. So there's a plum one coming out this year. But I found a couple of red flesh, and then I was like driving along. I was actually on my way to Johan to see Dan, and I was cruising along the secondary highway, and I was like, that looks like a red flesh on the side of the road, And so I safely turn around and go back, and I'm not shitting you, it was like a row of like 50 red flesh apple trees, like, because there's someone planted them for, because they're pretty. They're these little pink egg looking things, but like a smaller than it.
Imagine picking an apple that big and just filling up a 5-gallon bucket with that.
It took forever.
But each tree's got thousands of them on them. The reason why people plant these apples is because they're really pretty in spring, because there's so many blossoms on one tree.
And you would, I mean, you could shake the tree, but when you're on someone else's property and they're already like, I don't know if you're going to be able to come. You don't really want to like shake the hell out of your tree, so because it breaks branches and stuff. So you have to be a little bit more careful because it's not yours, right? And it's being a good steward to be cautious. So, but yeah, that was kind of an interesting, because I was like, and they weren't ripe yet when I went, so there was like a month early. And so I kept checking back and like trying, I pull over and just try the one on the end. And finally they were kind of ripe. So I swung back in, and it was an older woman who lived there. And I drove all the way down. Her house is in the back on the bottom of the lane, drove in, and it was like, and I had spent like an hour with her before, like chit chatting, walking the property. Like we were BFFs by the time I was gone. And then I showed back up to be like, hey, I'm here. Can I pick? And she like was like, I don't know if I know who you are, So it was like, I think she maybe had a little dementia or something. So which made it kind of awkward, because then she's like, sure. But then she was kind of weird about it, and they wouldn't let me go back this year. So I wasn't able to pick it this time around. So it's hard, her son was like, thought I was probably trying to rip her off or something. I don't know.
So it is really about, in some ways, serendipity, just keeping your eye out for apple sources.
Being a good stalker comes in handy.
And then, but in addition to that, are you guys farming any orchards, or are you planting any apples on the property?
Yeah, we have, we've got 2 orchards. We've got our planted one, which is all on semi-dwarf rootstock, and I think you guys were there once. It's all grafted, so it's but it's on like M7, so it's a medium-ish tree, so it doesn't need, the idea is that it won't need irrigation. It does it in the beginning of its life, but once we finish our replants that died off, we're gonna cut it off, and so it won't need irrigation. So it's got pears, 1 row of quince, and I can't remember how many rows of apples, but 700-ish trees, give or take.
Yeah.
And shit, I don't know,
Over
70 something varieties, if not more at this point. We
More
count
than that.
70 apples,
apples, 70 plus
probably
apples.
100 total, give or take. So we're kind of crazy. That's a lot of varieties. Most people, like, even on like someone who thinks they have a lot of varieties of cider apples, it's like 8, and it's always the same 8. So, and some of the trees in there are things that we foraged and found and sort of just fell in love with, but wanted a little bit more control, because that's one of the things with foraging. You just, you don't, it's all about the relationship, right? And sometimes they sell the property or changes hands, or they get sick of seeing you, or you piss them off, or whatever, and or they cut the tree down, which has happened, and you're like, not my tree, So it's like you have this relationship, and it's not like, it's nice to be able to have a control of that fruit too, because it's it ends up being your product, especially if you start a product based on that fruit. Not having control over how you get it is pretty hard, I think. So
are you also planting trees by seed?
Yeah, and we have a seedling orchard too. Yeah.
Okay, I really need you
So
to
like
explain to us that idea, because I think that when we came to visit you, it was pretty mind-blowing to me. So I know that, Dan, I think I remember you saying that when you plant an apple tree by seed, of course it must take like 10 times longer to actually get to fruit. Like, how long does it take? And then secondly, you were telling us about this, how the size of a tree planted by seed is different from a grafted tree.
Yeah, so apples, pears, they graft onto rootstock to control the size of the tree, where grapes will graft onto rootstock to control against phylloxera, which is a root louse that feeds on the plant. So that's the main difference between the two reasons of grafting. The trees that we planted as our grafted orchard, which is about 4 acres, those rootstock will allow them to get about 50%. So they'll be somewhere between 14 and 25 foot tall, depending on the variety that we're growing on top of that rootstock. And then when you get to the seedling orchard, apples will be somewhere between 25 and 50 foot tall, and pears will be somewhere between 50 and 70 foot tall.
Wow.
Pears for your heirs.
Yeah. And then quince are just shrubs.
Yeah. But they can still be
10,
they can still
15,
be 20. I mean,
yeah,
there's a couple of quince trees I picked that are probably 100 years old that are 20-ish more, maybe feet. Some of them I can't reach with my big ladder even. So it's kind of hard to say. But the best thing about a seedling is, number one, you don't know the variety. So apples aren't true to seed. So it's its own unique genetic baby. Every single seed is different, So you plant the seed, but also the fact that it taps down. So it creates a taproot. What's it called, Dan?
It's a primary radical.
Just like the word radical. So it's a radical tree, but it taps down. So part of our reasoning for this is because it goes so deep that you don't have to water it and you don't have to care for it, and it can exist through droughts and things like the future of Oregon's climate conditions, where, it's a concern not having water, which is also part of the reason of our other orchard. We didn't want to have to be stuck having to irrigate something. So that's why we planted a bigger rootstock. A lot of people who plant these cider orchards are planting a high density orchard because either the land's limited or they want more bang for the buck. But
you get more fruit per acre.
You get more fruit per acre, but also it's more inputs per acre. You have to water it, you have to fertilize it, you have more pests and disease pressure and trellising. So it's a lot, you have a lot on there. Yeah, it's more intensive. So, but the seedling orchard, the idea there is, we've picked so many different forage things, and if it's a big cider blend, in some ways the flavors don't really matter that much. If it's, a lot of the ones that we get from seedling apples are either tannic or high acid. They're very rarely boring. They're almost always like what people refer to as like, I just totally blanked the word.
Spitters.
A spitter, like where you don't want to eat it, you know. So you just, you know, it's like the one you used to toss at your sister when you were a kid or something instead of eating. So, and if we don't want it, you know, we plan to have it be kind of an agroforestry system because they're planted right now. They're on like a 60 by 60 grid, so they're gigantic. So we'd be able to run animals underneath as those trees get big enough that we actually have a tree instead of a tiny thing.
And also have multiple species of things going on underneath.
Yeah.
You know, I envision
A mixed.
in time having grapevines under there, you know, potentially some hybrid grapes where you don't have to worry about spraying any chemistries at all. You know, having stuff in there like just a maple tree here or a hazelnut tree or a walnut tree, and you know, and just kind of have it a little mixed forest, but mostly based around palm fruits.
Right now, the elk also cut right through that through that orchard, and it's like it's sort of an elk highway because we have a herd of, I don't know, 100 to 120 elk, so they migrate right around their property. So they do kind of a circle through here, but that's one of their major cut throughs. So if we have a lot of understory, we'd have to kind of figure out how to you know, fence it, because we don't want to lock them out because it's, you know, it's also their land. They were here before us doing this, so I kind of want to make it so that they can still pass through. And even when we have animals out there, we only have a 4-foot fence around that part, and they just jump right over it because they're gigantic. So that doesn't stop them, you know. But even when we had sheep out there, they still cut right through that pasture. They don't care. So, but anyway, just a side note.
So maybe we can, before we talk about the individual ciders and other cool drinks that we got from you, could you tell us, Kim, about your art? Because I think that's something that's like so interesting, and it and just what's the process? Because or do you make separate art pieces that also get translated into labels? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So I'm a cut paper artist, so I make a piece of art for each image. So each label has its own piece of art. You want to go grab the butterfly?
Sure.
I have a butterfly here right now, but for the kaleidoscope butterflies, Dan's gonna grab it. But it's so each color is a new layer of paper basically, and then I take plywood and I nail the paper down to plywood. So it's a lot of painting on the layers, and then I nail it all down. So I press them together with like a glue thing, like I glue them and then press them with this hot iron, and then I nail them down. So here's the kaleidoscope piece. But so you can kind of see the texture on there maybe. But so those are all little nails. All those little dots on the labels are all nails on the originals. So yeah.
Have you ever done an exhibit of your artwork while people are serving your ciders?
Oh,
We did
I feel like maybe.
I think we should do this in Seattle once we're back to being able to.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Public. So do you keep some of your artwork, or is most of it sold?
I sell most of it. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple pieces. I just took down a show that was up in Astoria. So that one was actually just there.
Mm-hmm.
So
you produce so for you, when you're making a cider, you're also kind of at the same time, when a new cider, you're thinking about the name of it and maybe the label.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm not necessarily great at that. I got to get in trouble for not having labels done in a timely manner, we'll say.
You know,
So,
most artists are procrastinating.
it's a dangerous game when it's a product that needs to get the hell out, and the, you know, because sometimes the pressure works beautifully and it comes together like, oh yes, I waited, now I've got it, boom, you know. And other times it's just a freaking battle. So I mean, I definitely have a couple pieces down in the studio that were like I made for labels and then I hated them, so they're like in the burn pile or something, you know, like I don't want to ever see them again in my life. So that happens, but most of the time I've gotten better about trying to because our dies are all cut around the art, so I'm trying now to be a little bit more efficient with my dies. Like the butterflies are all on the same die. So I'm trying to be a little bit better about that. So I just take a picture of them though. I don't do the actual art layout on the for the label because I don't know anything about graphic design. So I take a picture and then I send it to my friend, and she does all the graphics for us. So she does the actual layout and translates that into digital. So
what are you guys the most excited about regarding some of your more recent releases that we picked up? I know we got the Kaleidoscope Pet Nat and Mongoose, which we were excited about too. The Mongoose wine.
Well, when I sneak into the winery to get something to drink, I usually grab the Kaleidoscope. I kind of ebb and flow, but that's like my go-to right now. So,
can you tell us about it? Like, how did you guys make it? What was the thinking behind that?
Well, we just wanted to make another or a rosé pet nat. I've been doing rosé pet nat since 2014 with Johan. We had a little bit of Pinot Noir in 2018, 19. A little bit of Pinot Noir in 2019, but we didn't want to make Pinot Noir wine, still wine. And the intention was to make 100% Pinot Noir Pet Nat. But then at the same time, I was getting the Mongoose for red wine from Johan. And I just thought the Mongoose and the Pinot Noir would make a really pretty Pet Nat, rosé.
The color's so pretty. A dark Mongoose color on there is nice.
And so we just grabbed a little bit of fruit for that and did it that way, and really liked the results. So we're gonna probably keep that.
Yeah, we did it again in 2020, although it's not going to be as dark because of the fear of smoke taint. So everything was pressed a lot lighter. So it's going to be a lot different color this year than the next vintage. But so, you go with what you got. You ebb and you flow. Yeah, that's my favorite one. What else do you like?
I like the Mongoose and the Sauv Blanc. Excited to get Sauv Blanc out again.
I know, we're excited to get the Sauv Blanc back. It's not out at the moment, but it's coming.
But what's the Mongoose like? What's Mongoose like as a grape to work with? It's not something that we associate with the Pacific Northwest that much, I think. Yeah,
it's relatively new to the area. It reminds me a lot of Syrah. But maybe even a little more rustic than Syrah. But yeah, I mean, it reminds me a lot of working with Syrah again.
Mm-hmm.
How are the yields compared to Pinot?
Yields are much higher, and Mongoose is a much larger cluster, larger berry, but then much darker in color. A much deeper skin, thicker skin. And it's a later ripening too. So it's red wines, anything later than Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley is a dicey game because you're playing with the weather. You're picking it,
depending on the year.
Yeah, depending on the year. Luckily, the last couple of years, 19 was a little rainy, but not too bad. I mean, it's been a lot worse than that. And back in like 2007.
It just makes the case for more Pet Nat, in my opinion.
Yeah. And what about the Wixon cider? That was something new. Is that also a small production batch? Or?
Yeah. The Wixon, so the 2018 Wixon.
It's a single varietal.
Oh, it's a single varietal. So the Wixon is just it's basically a crab apple, but it's a farmed crab apple. So it's their apple's probably about that big, and they're like a reddish yellow on the outside, and kind of a crisp and high acid fruit to eat. I mean, you can
high acid, high sugar.
High sugar, yeah, really high sugar.
That's a bittersweet or bitter sour or
sweet. I would say it's not that it's a normal classification, but it's I would say a sweet sharp.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I mean, most people probably consider it just sharp because that's the categories that they have established, but it's definitely got high sugars. Like friends that are making Wixon in California are getting 21 bricks, which is, 12% alcohol.
Yeah, which I think ours were
Like
16 or 17 bricks, maybe 18 bricks. I don't know. It was
18
a lot.
18
Like
to 19
most of our
bricks.
stuff doesn't get the high bricks, but partly it was maybe where we got it that year. So in 2018, somebody called us, and this happens when you're a forager. People call you and say, "Hey, I've got all this fruit. You want to come pick it up?" But they were in Bend, Oregon, which is I don't know, I don't know,
2 hours.
couple hours away from here, but it's also the high desert of Oregon. So it's a totally different world over there, hot, dry. And so they had this orchard. It's like, who the hell would plant an orchard over there? I don't know, but it was planted, all this planted fruit, and like the people who were supposed to come pick it didn't, like, bailed on their contract. You guys just want to come? Please just come pick it. You don't have to pay us. Just come out and pick it. And so we had no idea what we were getting into. We're like, no pictures, no information really. So we're like, well, let's just drive the flatbed over there. So we took a couple bins on the back, like big picking bins, and drove over there. So, and then the place was like loaded with apples, and it was like Wixon. Although there was so much fire blight because it's not an appropriate place to plant apples, and so they ended up cutting down most of those trees. But so that year we got just a crap ton of Wixon. So we started just pulling it aside and doing its own. And then in 2019, it was half that fruit and half Wixon that was farmed by Kusa Orchards.
Kusa Orchard or Kusa Farms, which is Amarillo Hills. They also grow a lot of wine grapes. It's Kevin and Carla Chambers, who used to own Residence Vineyard in Yamhill, Carlton. They started a new farm in Amarillo Hills.
That's where the prairie dog stuff all comes from, that orchard. So I think you guys took the prairie dog too.
No, we didn't get any.
Oh shit.
So we need to get that next time. But it's super exciting.
It's in amphora right now.
Right.
Yeah, it's in amphora, and we're bottling at Pet Nat. So it's a ticking time clock right now.
Where's amphora from?
That's what my day is today, is testing it and bringing it in.
Are these the Beckham amphoras, or are you getting them from somewhere else?
Yeah,
no,
it's Beckham.
It's a Novum. Yeah.
Cool. So listen, I'm going to open this conversation up to other people on the call, because I know everyone's got a lot of questions, but before I just want to say how much we really love working with you guys. And it's just so fun to see what you guys create every year. And it's just really beautiful, and I'm excited because I think that the market is starting to open up to being open to the kinds of like artisan ciders that you're making. And I feel like the flavors and the concentration of the intensity is just really beautiful. And it's been super fun to see you guys evolve over time and bring so many different like creative, like co-ferments, and just it's been super exciting. But anyway, I'm going to open up to other people to ask questions.
We love you too, Trini.
So you guys just feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions to ask.
Just kidding.
Hi, I have a question. When will your tasting room be open, or is it open?
It is officially open but closed for the season. So we won't open until probably Memorial Day. So
okay.
Yeah, so we hope to be Memorial Day and then all summer into the fall. So it'll be open. We're Friday, Saturday, Sundays, but we're open at night because it's just prettier here in the evening. It's like the best time to be on this property is honestly at like dusk in the summer. So it's just my favorite time is 8 to 9 o'clock at night when it's like just beautiful and pretty. So otherwise it's just hot and horrible in the middle of the day in July. Like nobody wants to do that. So like come at night and enjoy it.
So
we hope to have a bunch of light.
If we have any buyers who find themselves in the area, would you be available to are you feeling comfortable to like give people a little bit of a tour, show them around, or?
Sure. Yeah. We did we don't really bring people in our house right now, but we've done a couple of little tastings like in the cidery with the door open or something, and then just walking around. So, yeah. It's the rainy season, but we don't care.
I got a question for you guys. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah. What are your expectations for flavor profiles on like standard trees versus smaller trees? That's something I've been interested in. And is it something that you guys have kind of played with before, or experimented or experienced in somebody else's orchard?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the forage stuff that we've found is
Big trees.
unplanted, you know, a deer pooped out a seed or something and dropped it there. So it's just,
Yeah.
so it's interesting to see all the different flavors that happen, but they're generally more concentrated just because they're not being farmed really, and not being irrigated. Irrigation's the biggest.
Yeah, I think the dwarfing trees, especially the ones that are so intensely farmed in sandy soils, hotter regions, sandy soils, they tend to be more watery in flavor and they lose intensity, and they also tend to have high nitrogen, so your fermentations go extremely fast. And I think you when you have a fast, quick, hot ferment, I think you burn off a lot of aromatics or volatilize a lot of aromatics. And sometimes even with temperature, you just can't control it because there's so much nitrogen in that fruit.
For sure.
Where the bigger trees are low in nitrogen, they're nice low ferments, and the fruit just seems to be a lot more concentrated in flavor. You get more, even if you're looking at the exact same variety of fruit, it's just more intense. It seems to be more acidic, more higher acid, and just more intense flavor and concentrated.
I'm always surprised at the, most of the feral trees that I found, like, I was trying to figure out thinking about the biggest apple I've ever found on like a tree just growing, and I mean, I don't think it's been more than, that big, like it's versus like some of the farmed ones are like monsters,
I mean, even looking at Gravenstein, from like Wooden's Gravenstein compared to the Gravenstein that's grown by the guy that's irrigated.
For sure, yeah.
The irrigated Gravensteins can be like
mothers.
huge,
Cool.
And then these Gravensteins on the unirrigated are, they're like that big. They're like 2-3 inches in diameter.
Yeah, it's interesting. All the water that just gets sucked in, but.
Are you guys going to prune your seedlings? Do you have a plan?
I'm trying to get Dan not to touch my seedlings. Don't touch it. Back the hell away. The owl cart pruning for us. It's fine.
I'm all into it being a Fukuoka farming situation. Masanobu Fukuoka used to talk about pruning his citrus orchard, and he had learned over time. When he first started doing natural farming on citrus, he tried pruning them and found that the trees got all diseased and died within a few years. And then he had found if he doesn't touch them, the trees inherently know what to do on their own. And he said, as soon as you start pruning a tree, you have to prune it every year.
Agreed.
Where if you don't prune it ever, the tree just knows what to do to get enough sunlight onto its fruit.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting concept just of the natural world in general. Like if we just leave it the hell alone, like things will work itself out versus us trying to manipulate and master everything as humans, Same with cellar practices, I would say. Like just leave it the fuck alone. Like stop touching it, We like to play scientists. This is YouTube. It doesn't matter if we swear, right?
Cool.
They wouldn't have invited you.
They know better. I think I've actually been pretty good. I mean, Mother Nature pruned, as we just saw during the ice storm, the pruning of Mother Nature happened. So it happens on its own.
Yeah.
Hi, Dan and Kim.
Hi, Liz.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And I've had the pleasure of working with your wines and ciders back in PDX.
Awesome.
And now I'm up here in Seattle, and it's as Trini mentioned, really finding homes for these ciders because they're different. It's almost a whole different category with certain buyers and helping them to understand the difference. And so we loved hearing a lot more specifics today, particularly about the abandoned orchards and how that can be a moving, shifting target. I have a question about that. When you find an abandoned orchard, have you tried to find out who the owner is, or do you what's the process besides? I know you talked a little bit about talking to this lady who maybe has dementia, or
Right.
yeah. Have you then inquired about purchasing the fruit, or what does that look like?
What's our adage? Apple stalker,
Door
door knocker,
knocker.
old man talker. Because it's like I drive by and I see like, ooh, that tree looks good. And sometimes I'll sneak up if I can get like a little bite without like actually talking to a human, to make sure it's not like worm infested, or, you know, because sometimes you get far away, it looks glorious, and then you get there and you're like, holy shit, there's a ton of worms, and you just committed to picking all this crap.
Or you can't get in it because it's surrounded by blackberries.
Yeah, there's too many, or it's just like
it's in a ditch, so you can't really reach it. Or,
I mean, although some of
yeah.
my favorite trees are ditch trees, but so then I have to figure out, like, sometimes on rural land, it's hard to know who actually owns it if it's on the edge of like a property or something. So if I don't know, I can also go to, I'm a real estate agent in my secret life. So sometimes I go into the tax record and look and see if I can find it on the aerial and figure out who owns it. Or I just like go to the nearest house and be like, hey, knock, knock, like, or I leave a little note with a card. I have little cards now because I think like, for instance, one of the people I pick her quince every year. But the first year I picked, she wouldn't let me have anything. And I roll with like a Subaru with a ladder on the back, and like picking bins in the inside. So I'm like pretty not scary. But when you're in the rural area, there's a lot of drugs and a lot of tweakers and a lot of thieves. So I think people are generally a little bit cautious about letting you come in. And I mean, sometimes people are like almost too sweet. They're like, come to the house, we'll feed you. I'm like, whoa, like, I'm not ready for this, but like, then some people are like, get out of here, like, so like her, like, I really wanted her damn quince. So I came back the next year and I pick another tree over there too. And so I came back the next year. I'm like, hi, just wondering if I could pick the quince. And then she's like, you seem pretty harmless. You're obviously not like, you're not like trying to steal anything here. And now like, I go there every year and pick. And so last year they let me have all these apples, and that's the first time they let me have apples. This is like year 4 now, right? So they finally let me have apples, which, and then her husband's like, I think there's this pear tree down at this other farm that we own down the road. Maybe you like that pear. He's like, it tastes horrible, but you might like it. I'm like, yes, but it was already gone by the time I got there. But so it's like, it's like kind of puddle jumps around. So it's mostly just begging until people let you in. And most people don't want anything. They're just happy that you want their fruit. And we always offer cider or wine to come back. So I always bring people stuff. I've thought about doing some kind of a thing where people, now that we have the tasting room open and there's like a public space where people could maybe bring me boxes of fruit and I could give them juice or apples or something, or cider back, like something like that. I know Wildcraft Cider does that. Like they have like a community cider basically, where people bring in apples, and a couple other cideries in the nation do it, where you have people just bring you their forage stuff. So it saves you the labor of having to pick it, but yet you also get all this fruit. But I kind of like seeing the tree and talking to the tree and knowing it a little bit. What? That's not weird.
It's not weird at all. That sounds normal to me.
See?
So when you taste, doing a little tester, do you ever taste any like pesticides that you're kind of shocked that, or are these all like?
These are all
really
random.
So
you can tell from a tree if it's been sprayed.
What have you found in terms?
Yeah, most people don't ever touch their trees. Like most of these old farms, like they don't give a shit about their orchard, but you can always tell if somebody's spraying the hell out of you know, the understory is usually where they get it. Like they just want to control the weeds coming into it, so they'll like murder it with Roundup or something. So you can see that, and I just don't pick those trees. So it's like you can once you know what pesticide damage looks like, you can just stay away from it. I've never, you know, you can usually tell if a tree has been farmed at all. Like I'd say I don't think anyone actually does anything that what I
Even
pick
just
for.
pruning, you know.
Yeah, I mean, people don't even prune these trees. You know,
Yeah.
they're so old and big usually that they don't want to deal with them. But you know, they also have a lot of scab. Sometimes there's a couple worms. You know, so you can usually tell that nobody's touching it with chemical application. But that would be one thing if we did do the community drive, is that you also wouldn't be able to see that. You know, people would bring you the fruit and you can kind of tell when someone is, you know, but someone could just bring something from their yard and maybe they sprayed the shit out of it earlier in the year. Like you don't really know that if you haven't seen the site. So that is one kind of hesitation with doing any kind of a community draw sort of thing. But
Cool. Who are your, when you're not drinking your cider, what other cider producers from Europe, say from France or from Spain, do you like to drink? What's, is there anyone else doing what you're doing in the general?
Cidery du Volcan. They're in Switzerland.
they're one of the first ciders that we had that we were like, yes.
Yeah,
Like now,
yeah.
now we know why we want to make
And
this, you know?
Jacques is doing foraging. He has some planted and some farmed, but a lot of foraging. And he's also working with Cider Apple and quince like we were.
Mhm.
You know, so those ciders are really delicious and really good. I tend not to repeat the ciders that I've already had when out looking for them. I want to try new. But areas in general is you know, I'm a sucker for Normandy ciders in general. I mean, I would go for Bordelais ciders, although they tend to be a little bit on the clean side for me. He's a very technical and very precise cider maker. They're absolutely delicious and farming biodynamically. So I'm into the farming and what he's doing there. You know, I'll repeat those from time to time.
I feel like we haven't been drinking that much this past year with the shutdowns. We just haven't been going to the city very much. And we don't, of course, out rural, we get nothing. So we haven't really been able to like get our hands on as much as we normally would.
And we're not doing market visits. And market visits
I know,
are
it's usually we're
when
we're like, let's see what's in their bottle shop. It's dangerous. I mean, there are some domestic producers too. I mean, like there's a lot of East Coast cideries that, you know, when we, again, like, you know, normally we do this during like CiderCon or like a big conference where we gather and then we get to taste a bunch of different people's stuff.
and we trade and swap.
Yeah, so that's always
ciders.
fun to just taste domestic people who are doing things.
You know, I love Eve's ciders. I like Aaron Burr ciders. South Hill ciders make some of the best ciders in the country.
I like Tilted Shed in California and Botanist and Barrel, I think, are doing some interesting things in North Carolina. And of course, Hayu.
Yeah. Floreal.
Floreal, yeah. So, yeah. Try to get around.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Once we're all inoculated, do you plan to do a? I came down to your art farm, the music festival.
Oh, cool.
Many summers ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. So much fun. I hope we get to do that again. Do you have plans once everything is?
Yeah, not this year, but we're actually doing live music though at the tasting room this summer. So we've committed. We just recently committed ourselves to do that. So we're kind of gearing up to set up a list of dates and just get people in here, you know. So it's kind of fun. I just started reaching out to some of my favorite musicians, like, can you come? So it'll be fun. So I'm excited. I think everyone's dying for a little live music, honestly. So
Oh yeah.
it'll be good. And we have like the perfect setup, you know, it's all outside. It's plenty of space. So you can just spread to your heart's desire, you know, so it'll be good.
Excellent.
I've got another meeting I got to get to, so I'm going to drop out and leave you
Oh,
with
it's
Kim.
okay. We're gonna wrap up. We'll
Oh.
wrap up. Thank you for your time.
Thanks,
All
you
right,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.